Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz, and this is the NFL edition of Ron's Rundown. We're going to go over all the Week 7 games, starting with the Thursday Night Football contest, going through the Sunday card, and of course ending with the Monday Night Football game. If you like what you see, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Helps us out a ton. And don't forget to put your football picks in the comments section below. If you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at the Premium Picks tab at pickdawgz.com. And don't forget, we have a discount code 15OFF. That's 15OFF. You save 15% at checkout with any play, a long-term plan, or just a single game, or a daily package as well. So check out at Pick Dawgz Premium. Alrighty, here we go. Here are the games for Week 7 in the NFL. First up, we have that Thursday Night Football contest between the Arizona Cardinals and the New Orleans Saints. We're going to see the Cardinals here as home favorites, just small home favorites in this one, and the total set at 45 points. I'm going to look at the total in this game. I know we've seen a lot of primetime unders, including the Monday night game this past week with the Broncos and Chargers, Sunday night football between the Eagles and Cowboys, and then Thursday night football as well, and that very low-scoring, ugly game between the Commanders and Bears. And I like the under yet again in this spot. I think the Saints defensively are still one of the better defenses in the NFC this season. Their offense has been inconsistent, and I don't think they're going to get too much done here on the road. When you look at the Cardinals on the other side, their defense has really improved. I will have to say, at the beginning of the season, they struggled mightily against the Kansas City Chiefs. They really weren't getting much pressure on opposing quarterback throughout the first 3-4 weeks of the season. But last week we saw, even though they lost the game to the Seahawks, it was still a tough road game. They forced 5 sacks. They gave up less than 300 yards against the Seahawks offense that we've seen do a lot of damage against some teams this year. So the Cardinals defense stepped it up. They've been pretty good against the run. Their secondary has improved. They're getting pressure on the quarterback. Like I said, 5 sacks last week. However, there's still some offensive struggles for the Cardinals right now. They gave up 6 sacks last week against a pretty bad Seahawks defense. They didn't really do too much offensively, only 9 points in that game. And overall, the Cardinals have only had one game this season where they've had over 400 yards of offense. It really hasn't been a very good season offensively for the Cardinals at all. And I think there's going to be a low-scoring, typical primetime under yet again. So give me the under in this Saints-Cardinals game to start the week. Next up, it's the New York Football Giants taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jags are 3-point favorites here at home. Total set at 42.5 points. These New York Giants have been such a story this year. 5-1 to start the season. Brian Daboll's got to be one of the early season head coach of the year favorites, and there's no surprise. I mean, this team is just finding ways to win. Situational offense and defense with great coaching. I mean, this team on paper, you look last week's game against the Ravens, they were outgained 406 to 238 in terms of total yards. They could not run the football very well. Daniel Jones was sacked 4 times. They defensively could not stop the run, 8.8 yards per carry and 211 rushing yards allowed to those Ravens. Now, the secondary had a much sharper performance. They found the interception at the end of that game, their first interception defensively this season. Couldn't have come at a better time for the Giants, and they're just finding ways to win, but I don't love this spot for the Giants here. On the road, their first true road game since week 1 of the season. That was an upset win over the Titans, but since that game, they played 3 straight at home against the Cowboys, Panthers, and Bears. Then they went to London to play the Packers at a neutral site, and then back home at MetLife last week against Baltimore. But here in Jacksonville, the Jaguars have been able to run the football pretty well this year. 4.9 yards per carry overall this season. The last 2 weeks, 5.2 yards per carry against the Texans, and then last week, a fantastic performance on the ground, 243 rushing yards and 7.4 per attempt on the ground for the Jaguars. That worries me quite a bit for this Giants defense that has really struggled against the run this season, giving up 5.6 yards per carry, over 140 rushing yards, and the last 5 weeks really have not done much at all against the run. They did really well against the Titans to start the season against Derrick Henry. Since that game, they have not been able to stop the run, and I don't love their chances in a road game, in a tough road environment, to be able to do so against the Jaguars consistently. So give me the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're getting a pretty good price for them because the Giants have excelled and because the Jaguars have struggled in the last few weeks, but give me the Jags laying the points. In our next game, we see the Detroit Lions taking on the Dallas Cowboys. Here in Dallas, we're going to see the Cowboys as 7-point favorites and a total set at 48 points, one of the higher totals of the week. It does look like Dak Prescott is going to return this week for the Cowboys. If he is ruled out, say, at the end of the week, we could expect this line to drop maybe a point or two. But I still like the Cowboys, whether it's Cooper Rush or Dak Prescott in this one. I think the Cowboys win this game by double digits. I think their defense, you look at the defense of the Cowboys this year, getting a ton of pressure on quarterbacks, 11.4% of opposing QB passing plays have ended in a sack for the Cowboys defense is exactly what you want to see. And they faced a real tough offensive line last week against the Philadelphia Eagles, and their defense held up. Even though they lost that game and they didn't cover the spread, it really wasn't the defense's fault. They only gave up 268 total yards. They had 4 sacks in that game. They've had 9 in the last 2 weeks now. And overall, their defense has been one of the best, if not, I would say a top 3 in the league right now. And they're stopping the run. The secondary's been pretty good. And like I said, getting that pressure on the QB, even though the Lions have a really good offensive line. We saw their last game against the Patriots a couple weeks ago. They were shut out in that one. The offense didn't do anything really. And I don't like their chances offensively here. And then when you look at the Detroit Lions defense, we knew going into this season it wasn't going to be very good. Last year, giving up 27 points per game. Their secondary was one of the worst in the league. But this year, it's even gotten worse. I mean, they're giving up 34 points per game, over 400 total yards per game. This defense is not where it needs to be. They're getting virtually no pressure on the quarterback, no sacks in the last 2 games against the Patriots and Seahawks, who have had some offensive line issues. Both of those teams have. So I think this is going to be a tough spot here for Detroit. Give me the Dallas Cowboys laying the points at home. Next up, we see an AFC South battle between the Indianapolis Colts and the Tennessee Titans. The Titans are small home favorites here at 2.5 points, and the total set at 42.5. Now, when you look at these divisional games where the home team is favored by 0.5 point to 3 points, so small favorites here at home, the road dog has actually been really profitable in the NFL. In the last 334 games in this situation, the road dog against the spread is 174 wins, 145 losses, and 15 pushes. So 54.5% winners with those road teams against the number. That's a 7.8% return on investment if you made $100 wages on each of those road dogs. So you look at that and you look at also this particular series in the Colts and Titans. Unlike the Colts and Jaguars, which has been dominated by the home team, the road team has been really good against the number. They are 5-1 in the last 6 and 7-3 against the spread in the last 10 between the Colts and Titans. So the road team playing well in this series. The road team, when you're getting not a lot of points, has also been really profitable in these divisional games in the NFL. And when you look at the numbers, although the Titans coming off that bye week and they are going to be the more rested team, I still think the Colts are the better team, and you're getting 2.5 points with the better team, in my opinion. We saw probably the best week from this offense, other than maybe week 1 against the Texans, from the Colts last week. 434 total yards. Matt Ryan had a fantastic game. The offensive line held up. They didn't run the football well, but they were also without Jonathan Taylor, so they were down to their really their third string running back in Deion Jackson, who was good out of the passing game, wasn't really good in the run game, but the offense was clicking. The offensive line held up, didn't give up a single sack in that one. Their defense put some pressure on the quarterback, and I think the Colts are the better team here. So I'm going to take the points here with Indianapolis. I think they win this game outright. Next up, it's the against the spread darlings of the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Cincinnati Bengals, as the Falcons are 6-0 against the number this season, and they're looking to make it 7-0 here, but I just don't love their chances. I think the Bengals, because of the Falcons' success against the number and the Bengals kind of being a bit of a mediocre team overall this year, I think we're actually getting a lot of value with the home team in Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati is the better team on both sides of the ball. The offensive line has improved quite a bit from the beginning of the season. Last week against the Saints, the Saints gave them everything they could handle, really. It was a tough spot there for Cincinnati. It's never easy to play in New Orleans, and especially in your second straight road game, but the Bengals found a way to grab a win in that one. Their defense was strong towards the end of that game. They didn't really let the Saints do much in the passing game, which the secondary's held up a lot better than what most expected going into the season. And when you look at this Atlanta Falcons team, yes, they pulled off the big-time upset over the Niners last week, but really, they got outgained by about 50 yards. Their offense didn't do too much in that one. They took advantage of a lot of mistakes that San Francisco made. They were +3 in the turnover battle, which is great in a week-to-week basis, but it's very unsustainable when you're looking at a long-term aspect. And I think because of that big performance over San Francisco, because of the 6-0 against the number, the Falcons are just plainly overvalued here. I still don't think this is a very good Atlanta team, really on either side of the ball, and I think the Bengals win this one going away at home. So give me the Cincinnati Bengals laying the points here at home. Next up, we have another divisional battle between the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens in the AFC North. The Ravens are touchdown favorites, laying 7 points here, and the total is set at 46.5. When you look at the Ravens, I mean, they have really struggled in the second half of games this season. So if you do like Baltimore, maybe worth a shot taking them in the first half, as they've had so many collapses in the second half this year, including last week against the Giants. It really wasn't even the second half. It was just the last 6 minutes of that game. The Ravens were up by 20-10 with about 6 minutes to go in that one. And then all of a sudden, final score 24-20. Giants win it. So, real surprising and real shocking loss for the Ravens, but when you look at this series, the Ravens have just dominated the Browns. They're 4-0 in the last 4 against the number. They're 9-3 in the last 12 against the number, and the home team is 2-1 in the last 3 against the spread as well. I think the Ravens, the big advantage that they have is just on the lines. I think even though the Browns have a great offensive line, they're able to run the football. The Ravens have been really good defensively against the run this year, and the Ravens run the football very efficiently. The Browns have had their issues against the run this season at times, especially in those games against the Falcons and Chargers where they gave up 200-plus rushing yards to both of those teams. So, I do have my question marks about this Browns defense. They've had a lot of injuries this season that they've had to deal with, and really last year as well. And their offense a little bit one-dimensional. I'm not really in love with the way Jacoby Brissett has looked as of late, especially last week. He really struggled against the Patriots, and the offensive line had its worst week as well. I think the Ravens are the much better team here, and I'm going to lay the points here with Baltimore at home. In our next game, we see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers are 11-point underdogs here at home, and the total set at 40.5 points. So if you do like Carolina, you're getting about 25% of the total with those 11 points, but I just can't get there with Carolina. I'm going to stay away from the spread, even though when you look at the Bucs, they are 5-0 against the number against these Panthers in the last 5 meetings between these two teams, but the Buccaneers have not really impressed. I mean, we saw them last week against a backup quarterback who actually got injured. Mitchell Trubisky had to make his way into the game again, but the Bucs were double-digit favorites on the road against the Steelers. They lose the game outright, 20-18. They're now 1-3 in their last 4 games overall. Their defense has played well, but the offense has been so inconsistent. The offensive line has been really struggling to block the run. They have not been able to run the football at all this season. 68 rushing yards for Tampa Bay and 3.1 yards per carry per game this season. That's just not going to get it done. Even though you got Tom Brady in a pretty good passing game, you got to be able to run the football. You can't be too one-dimensional offensively. Now, the Panthers defensively have held up at most times this season. Now, in the second half, they certainly struggled against the Rams, but the big thing for me with this total is why I'm leaning towards the under is I just don't know where the points are going to come from for Carolina. I mean, this team has a lot of issues right now. We saw Robbie Anderson get kicked off the team basically in the middle of the game last week. Their offense is just not really doing anything with Baker Mayfield. Without Baker Mayfield, P.J. Walker struggled, in my opinion, and DJ Moore has not gotten going. Even though he's one of the more talented receivers in the league, in my opinion, he's just not done anything because they're not really targeting him much. And Christian McCaffrey, another guy who's very talented offensively, he was used quite a bit last week against LA, but after the first half, they just couldn't do anything. They could not move the ball. I don't trust their offense in this game, so I lean towards the Bucs against the spread, but I'm going to take the under because I just don't think the Panthers score much in this one. Next up, we see the Green Bay Packers taking on the Washington Commanders. The Packers are favorites here on the road, and the total is set at 41.5. So another pretty low total, and another team that's home getting points. And this time, I actually do like the home dog in Washington getting the points, just because Green Bay has just not deserved laying this kind of number. When you look at their last few games against the Jets and Giants, two teams that, yes, they're both having winning seasons right now, but still two teams that the Packers should certainly win and honestly cover, especially last week where they were only laying 7 at home. It was a miserable performance last week by the offense. Aaron Rodgers struggled. The offensive line didn't do anything, that they could not run the football, and only 278 total yards of offense in that game for Green Bay. Now, the defense held up pretty well, but in the end of that one, they could not stop the Jets. They only gave up 3 points in the first half and then give up 24 by the end of the game. Now, some of that was because of special teams, blocking punts and field goals. Really, anything that could go wrong in that game for Green Bay, it went wrong. And to me, it's just not worthy of laying 5.5 points, even against a pretty, struggling Commanders team. We are going to see the backup quarterback here in Taylor Heineke, as Carson Wentz is going to be out for a while. And I honestly think that could be an upgrade at quarterback. I mean, Heineke's played really well in the backup role. We know backup quarterbacks against the number have been pretty good in the NFL the last 2 seasons. And, Heineke's experience last year, he played, most of the season for Washington at almost 500 passing attempts. So he's no rookie. He knows exactly what to do in this particular offense. And I think he'll be able to trust the defense, trust the ground game. They've got a really good running back group in Gibson, McKissick, and Robinson. I think they run the football well. I think their defense shows up, and I think they keep this game close. I like Green Bay to win it in the end, but I do like the Commanders plus the points in Washington. Next up, we have the New York Jets taking on the Denver Broncos. The Broncos are 3-point favorites, and the total set at 40.5. Now, we've got good news and bad news with this matchup. The good news is we don't have to watch another Broncos primetime game this week. It's really great news overall. But the bad news is we still have about 3 games that are going to be standalone national TV or some kind of televised ball game for the Broncos down the stretch. Next week's going to be the London game on NFL Network, and they've got a primetime game against the Chiefs. And then all I want for Christmas is the NFL to step in and move that game between the Rams and Broncos on Christmas Day to Christmas Eve, or just get rid of the game altogether. I think we'd all be happy with that. This Broncos team has been tough to watch. Russell Wilson and the offense has not done anything. They've scored 15 points per game, coming off a game last week in prime time against the Chargers, 16 points. The offense looked great in the beginning of the game. I mean, Russell Wilson, I think he was 10 of 10 or 10 of 11 passing to start the game. It's like, oh, finally, this team's finally figured it out. But nope, second half of the game, they could not do anything. Overtime, nothing. The defense has held up. The defense has been one of the best in the league. So if you like defense, you certainly like watching Broncos primetime games. But I mean, Russell Wilson has been one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL this year. There's no doubt about that, and he's actually one of the more higher paid quarterbacks. So really disappointing for Broncos fans there. But overall, this New York Jets defense has held up quite a bit this year. 313 total yards per game allowed, one of the best totals in the league. In the last 3 weeks, under 300 total yards allowed to the Steelers, Dolphins, and Packers. Now, last week was really impressive because, going into that game, I had mentioned they played the Steelers, backup quarterbacks, the Dolphins, backup quarterbacks, injury problems. But going into Green Bay, facing Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau, tough offense, tough environment, for the Jets defense to really show up, have a great special teams game as well. Really impressive stuff there for the Jets. And there's no surprise. I mean, Robert Saleh was one of the best defensive coordinators going into that, getting the job as the head coach for the Jets. So we knew this Jets defense was going to be strong. The offense has still had some issues. I don't really love Zach Wilson. Last week, he did not really play very well. Only 10 of 18 passing for 99 passing yards. And the offense only had 278 total yards. But the defense has really saved the day for the Jets, and that's why they're 4-2. The Broncos, the reason they even have 2 wins is because of their defense. So I like the under in this game. I wouldn't be surprised to see a 3-0 final score in this one, to be honest with you. But give me the under in this Jets-Broncos ball game. Alrighty, now that we've made it through that Broncos game, we can talk about this Texans-Raiders ball game, where the Raiders are 7-point favorites. Total set at 45.5 points. Now I'm going to look at the team total here for the Raiders. I like the team total over 26.5 points. I think the Raiders could score 30 plus in this game. So when you look at the Texans defense, one of the worst in the league in my opinion, over 400 yards allowed per game to opposing teams. Their secondary has struggled. They haven't been great against the run, and they've only given up 20 points per game. So that's really the big thing, is I think we're actually getting some value here with the Raiders team total, because the Texans are giving up a ton of yards, but not necessarily giving up a lot of points, because it's been a bend but don't break defense. But you also got to look at the offenses they faced this year. The Colts week 1, we knew Matt Ryan was struggling early on. The defense gave up 20 points in that game, but 517 total yards. Then they played the Broncos. We just mentioned the Broncos and their offensive woes. Then they played the Bears, who have not really done anything offensively. They played the Chargers, and the Chargers scored 34 points on them. So the first real good offense that they faced this season, and really not even a top 5 offense, but a decent offense this year, they gave up 34 points. Then their last game before the bye against the Jaguars, another offense that I would say is mediocre, about average in the league. So now you're facing a Raiders team that's frustrated. They're 1-4 to start the year. This is a must-win situation, coming off its best win, or their best offensive performance. I should say they didn't win the game, but their best offensive game of the season against Kansas City. 29 points in that one, over 375 yards. A couple of nice big plays to Devontae Adams in the end zone, and the running game got going. That's the big thing for me with Las Vegas, is the beginning of the season they weren't able to run the football, and this is an offense that needs to be more two-dimensional, because Derek Carr is talented, but you can't rely on the passing game on every single play. But Josh Jacobs in the run game in the last game, 6.5 yards per carry, 155 rushing yards against the Chiefs. The week before that, against a really good Broncos defense, they had 212 rushing yards, 5.6 yards per carry. So the offense, two-dimensional, still has a lot of weapons in the passing game. I like Derek Carr, quarterback. I don't like this Texans defense. So give me the over, team total 26.5 points for this Raiders team. Next up, it's the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners are actually the home dogs here, getting 3 points, and the total is set at 48.5. So a really steep total, despite this being a defense-first team in San Francisco. But when you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, we know this is one of the better teams in the AFC. They're coming off a loss to the Bills, but there's no shame in that. This Bills team is really good this year, and a 24-20 loss against the Buffalo Bills, not going to kill you. But when you look at the Chiefs this year, and really in years past as well, they have not really been great against the spread. spread. I mean, this season, they covered the number against the Cardinals easily, but then they didn't cover against the Chargers. They lost a game outright as favorites against the Colts. They did cover on the road against the Bucs, but then failed to cover in their last 2 games against the Raiders and Bills. So now they are 2-4 to start the year against the number, despite being 4-2 overall. And I think that just goes to show you that the Chiefs are usually overvalued because of their public perception, because they're a very flashy team, great offense. Patrick Mahomes, one of the better quarterbacks in the league, but usually they are overvalued. And I think they are in this spot, especially when you look at San Francisco coming off that ugly loss on the road against the Falcons, where they had -3 in the turnover differential. They lost the game by 14 points. And, their defense is still top 5 in the league, in my opinion. They're giving up only, I would say, top 3 in the league, 256 total yards per game. That's one of the best in the league this season. They get a ton of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. They stop the run. Their secondary's held up. Now, yes, there has been some injuries with this defense, but I still think it's going to show up in this game. And I lean towards the under in this one, despite the Chiefs being, a team that's usually going to score about 25 plus a night pretty easily. But I think the San Francisco 49ers can compete in this one. I think their offense is good enough. Even though last week it wasn't the prettiest sight, their offensive line has still been really good. Didn't give up a single sack last week, and that's been 2 of the last 3 weeks where Jimmy G's had really all day in the pocket to throw. Is he my favorite quarterback to back? No, but I think he has a ton of weapons around him. I think this offense does enough here to compete in this one. I like the 49ers to win this game outright, but I'm going to take the 3 points just in case. So give me the 3 with San Francisco at home. Next up, we see the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers are 7-point favorites in this one, and the total is the steepest of the week at 51.5 points. And I do think there's a little bit of value on the under. I think it's a little bit more of a contrarian play when you look at how both of these defenses have been about so-so this year, and the offenses have been definitely ahead of the defenses. But last week, we saw Seattle struggle offensively, only 300 yards of offense, 19 points in that one. Their offensive line has not been great this year, especially in the last couple of weeks, and that's where I really have some issues with Seattle here, is I think the Chargers are going to get a lot of pressure on Geno Smith. They've been able to get pressure on the quarterback really most of the year, but the last week, 4 sacks on Russell Wilson. A couple of weeks ago, 4 sacks on Davis Mills, and I do think the Chargers defense is a real bounce back week last week. I mean, you look at their performance in Cleveland, they could not stop the run. They gave up 28 points, but last week, 258 total yards allowed. They got pressure on the quarterback. Their secondary held up. I think this is going to be a little bit more defensive than the total suggests and what we've seen for most of the year. I think the Chargers win this game pretty handily. I think it's going to be like a 27-20 final score in the end, but I like the under in this Chargers-Seahawks game as my favorite play in this one. The Sunday Night Football game between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Dolphins, we see Miami as 7-point favorites and a total set at 45 points. Now, we see quite a few teams this week that are favored by 6 or more points, and the Dolphins included here, even though they are coming off 3 straight losses. But it does look like Tua Tagovailoa will be returning to Miami at quarterback, and I do think that will certainly help this offense overall. The big thing for me is their defense struggled quite a bit at the beginning of the year, but Miami's defense against the run has been real impressive this season. Last week, only giving up 78 total rushing yards, and overall this year, one of the better run defenses in the league. And last week against Minnesota, obviously disappointing loss of 24-16 in the end. They did not cover the spread, but they outgained Minnesota by 220 yards in that one. They were just -3 in the turnover differential, and that's going to be the deciding factor in the NFL most times. We've seen it already a few times with last week's games, but they had 458 total yards of offense with backups in there. The run game didn't really do too much, but it's still one of the better passing games in the NFL because you've got 2 of the better weapons in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Yes, they battled some injuries, but they've played most of the year, and I do think with Tua coming back, I think this offense is going to be in pretty good shape against the Steelers defense that I'm still questionable about. We know last week they played well against the Buccaneers, but they still have a lot of injuries to worry about. I don't think the offense is going to move the ball too much, and I think it's going to help Miami in the end. This is not really the most exciting Sunday night or primetime game on paper, and really Sunday Night Football games have been pretty good this season overall. Last week with that Eagles-Cowboys game, but I think this one's going to be a pretty one-sided game in my opinion. I'm going to take the Dolphins and lay the points at home. In our final game of the week, we see your Monday Night Football contest on ESPN between the Chicago Bears and the New England Patriots. The Patriots are pretty sizable favorites here at home, and the lowest total of the week in this one at 39.5 points. And I do think the total makes a lot of sense. I'm going to take the under here in this Bears-Patriots game. The Patriots defense is in great form. Last week, only giving up 15 points to the Browns. The week before, 0. They shut out the Lions in 29-0 fashion. And against this Bears offense, it's only scoring 16 points per game, under 300 total yards per game. The offensive line's been one of the worst in the league. The red zone offense has struggled. Justin Fields has made a lot of mistakes.
and he hasn't had a lot of time to throw as his offensive line is caving in on a lot of plays. 23% of passing plays have ended in a sack for Fields and the offense, and last week 5 sacks allowed against the Commanders. The defense showed up, though, for Chicago, that's for sure. They only gave up 86 passing yards against Carson Wentz and the Commanders, and only 214 total yards, so the defense had its best week. The offense still struggles. Give me the New England Patriots and the Chicago Bears under the total in this Monday Night Football game to end the week.
And that's it. Those are the games for Week 7 in the National Football League. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to put your football plays in the comments section below. Again, if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at Pickdawgz Premium. And don't forget that 15 off 150FF to save 15% at checkout. As always, this is Ron Romanelli. Good luck.